Hey everyone, it's Siobhan here. Today's video is a vlog video. It's going to be a little different from what I usually do. It's going to be a little bit more personal to my life. And generally on my channel I try not to talk about things that are personal or controversial in any way, like religion or politics, just because I like to keep things more light and fun. But recently my dog died, and that is has been a very significant kind of event in my life. And I felt like I wouldn't do him any justice, or myself, or this hobby of YouTube any justice by continuing on with it without ever making mention that this has happened or that he lived and existed. And I just felt like it would be wrong to just kind of jump right into hair videos. And I know that some of you don't like my vlog videos or you don't watch them, and that's fine. You can totally skip over this one, or you can watch, or you can unsubscribe. It really makes no difference to me at all. So that's fine. I mean, whatever. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk about Murphy, and believe it or not, vlogging can be somewhat therapeutic. Also, it's cool to connect with people who have had similar experiences, and I talked a lot about this on my personal Facebook page, and as it turns out, many of you are animal lovers like me and have gone through kind of the same thing, so that really helped put some of my own sorrow into perspective. And maybe that'll happen again by me recording this and sharing the details of this with you. To tell the story of Murphy, I'd probably have to start right after high school. I met my first real serious boyfriend at the beginning of college, and within the first few weeks of knowing him, actually right after 9/11, and it was very, very intense. We talked marriage, we talked kids. I was 18 when I met him, he was 25, so there was somewhat of a significant age difference between us, and it didn't really seem to affect our relationship until later down the road, mostly because I was young and I wanted to go out and do things that young people do, like go to parties and have friends and do all sorts of, I guess, crazy things. And he'd already had a lot of those life experiences and was moving on into his own sort of growing up adult phase, I suppose. And I was holding him back in a lot of ways. But he definitely wasn't very kind to me in the end. And the last year we were together, I went back and forth deciding whether or not I should move in with him, and I did. I moved in the last 6 months of our relationship. Yeah, just about. And I kind of thought maybe that it would help sort of keep our relationship going. I thought that maybe it would make things better between us. It was very, very complicated. We were dealing with like mental illness. We were dealing with a small space, not having money, me having dropped out of college. There were a lot of things on our plate at the time. And he was not in a good way. And I was too immature to help him the way he needed to be helped. So yeah, it didn't work out. And unfortunately, it ended up being one of those breakups that takes months and months and months and months before you finally kind of let go. And if you've ever been in a situation like that, it's just like, I mean, it is mentally exhausting. Not to mention that I was completely and totally on my own. He either sort of didn't like my friends or my friends didn't like him. And during our relationship, I hadn't really noticed, but I kind of lost like everyone. I really didn't have people around in the same way that I had in high school and beyond that, or before that. So yeah, my ex and I finally broke up. I had nowhere to go. Thankfully, this wasn't a person who was kicking me out onto the street, but he was definitely like, you know, I'd really like for you to be actively looking. I don't want you to stay here longer than 6 months. And I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. I mean, I was a combination of things. Heartbroken, I felt abandoned, depressed, my hair was falling out. I mean, I remember one morning I was just I hadn't eaten in like 2 days because I couldn't hold anything down. I was so distraught over all of this that I actually kind of fell on the subway steps going to work and like totally split open my chin. I mean, my hair was literally coming out in clumps. My skin was like green. It was just like, I was not in a good way. So one of my good friends, who is actually still a very good friend of mine, her name is Anush, She had a home, or has a home, in Whitestone out in Queens, and she offered me the basement apartment. So between the time we broke up and the time I moved into the new apartment, there was just like a month in between where I packed things up, and she was actually the only person that came to help me move my belongings to Queens. I knew that I would have a hard time out in Whitestone just because I guess for those of you that don't live in New York and you're not really sure of like the setup of how the boroughs are or what it's like, when we talk about the city, we're talking about Manhattan, and then of course you have the outer boroughs, but like the further out you go into the boroughs, I mean, you're still technically in New York City, but it becomes more and more suburban, and that means like you need a car to get everywhere, and the shops are all spaced out. You're depending on transportation, public transportation. It's very, very iffy, and I knew that I would be dealing with all of those things, so I was just kind of adding more bullshit onto my plate, but I needed to get the hell out of the situation that I was in. And yeah, Anush, I was sort of relying very heavily on her. I felt like such a burden because she had a car, she also had friends, but it can't be fun carting around a person who is extremely depressed all of the time, and that's what I was. You know, it was awful because I really did feel like such a burden to her. I think within the first 3 months of living in Whitestone, I decided that maybe adopting a dog would be something that would be good for me. I've always loved dogs. I've had dogs before, and when I broke up with my ex and moved out, I actually left a dog behind. His name was Shane. He was a German Shepherd mix, and he really wasn't my dog. My ex and I had talked about adopting a dog together, but it had to be like an allergy-free dog because he had severe allergies. And one day, I guess I was out, I don't really remember where I was or what I was doing, but he went to a shelter with a friend and he picked out Shane, and I was furious. I tried really hard the first few weeks not to bond with the dog or even pet him, because I felt like I hadn't signed my name to the papers when we adopted the dog, so if anything should happen between the two of us, I'd have no rights to him. And that's kind of what happened. I mean, when we broke up, my ex and I, we did have the talk, you know, we were going to try and share custody, but I knew it wasn't really going to work out. First off, Anush's mom was terrified of dogs, and Shane was enormous. There was really no way for my ex to get the dog to my house or me back, or get him back to my ex's house. There's just like a huge distance between us, and neither of us had a car. And the other thing too is I thought that being around Shane, or having to deal with my ex because of Shane would just sort of prolong the time that it would take for me to get over my ex-boyfriend. I really didn't know. I'd really never been heartbroken before. I really didn't know where this was going to go for me, and I just kind of decided to leave them both behind, and that had been very difficult. So, especially the dog, because I had tried really hard not to bond with him, and then eventually he won me over, and you know, I think that was one of the more sad parts of the 2 days that I spent packing up my belongings, was just like seeing the dog on the couch and knowing that sooner rather than later I'd be leaving him and not able to see him again. My girlfriend Anush packed me up into her car and we went to North Shore Animal League, which is a shelter on Long Island. It's a no-kill shelter. It's very different from like the ACC here on 110th Street, which is literally doggy Auschwitz. It's a terrible place. I mean, the animals come into the shelter, or come into that pound, and they've got like 7 days, and if they're not adopted out in that time, they're euthanized. And so yeah, you could definitely feel the difference when you go into a non-kill shelter and a kill shelter. And I wanted to be in a more positive environment because I was feeling very emotional and kind of vulnerable at the time. And yeah, I didn't want to adopt a dog out of pity. I wanted to adopt a dog because we had that connection. I think we were in the shelter for about an hour and a half, I'd say, and I didn't really have any like specific idea of what it was that I wanted. I had kind of a general idea, and I know that might seem strange to you, that to those of you that don't have a pet or haven't ever owned one, or maybe don't even like animals. But I was looking for somebody that I was going to connect with like immediately and emotionally. Kind kind of in the same way that you would if you were making friends with somebody. You look for that thing that's going to connect you. And I wasn't finding that. I mean, we looked at puppies, we looked at young dogs, we looked at old dogs, we even looked at the cats. And by the end of an hour and a half, I was getting increasingly frustrated because I also had no attention span at the time either. And I was kind of like, you know, I'm not finding anybody today. I need to get out of here right now. It was just like pure disappointment. And as I was walking out, there's like this big open space that is kind of shaped in a circle, and it has these like benches that are lined around it. And the idea is that if you see a dog in one of the crates or the cages that you like, they take the dog out and you bond with the dog here in this open space, or you introduce the new dog to the dog that you already have, and you see how they get along. So it's kind of like the meeting place. And as we were walking out, I was looking into that meeting place, and I saw Murphy. Murphy was standing there with his tail between his legs, and he was on a leash, standing next to two teenage volunteers. And I think I noticed him before my girlfriend did, but she vocalized before I did, and she was like, "Oh my God, Siobhan, it's a beagle, go, go." And yeah, I should say that I have a soft spot for beagles. I always have. And we hadn't seen any in the shelter that day. Not that I would have not adopted a different kind of dog, I just wasn't feeling like any of the dogs were for me. And when I saw Murphy, I thought, there's nothing stopping me from at least petting him. He's super cute. And the first couple things that I noticed about him was he had this wonderful pink nose and this heart-shaped spot on his forehead, and these like kind of amber gold eyes, which I thought were really unusual and beautiful. He was just a lovely looking dog. And as it turned out, he had been in a kill shelter in Tennessee and had just arrived to North Shore that day on the train. He'd only been there for a couple of hours. He hadn't even been logged into the shelter system yet. And he had no idea where he was. Like, he had no idea where he was. He was absolutely terrified. And the moment I showed him like a little bit of kindness or petting, he literally sat at my feet and put his head in my lap. I was sitting on the ground like this, and he just kind of like climbed into my lap. And I knew. I knew that he was going to be my dog. There was no way that I was going to let this guy go. I took Murphy home. I had set up a bed in my living room for him, and he figured it out pretty quick that that was his space and he could go and hang out there. And I went to bed in the next room, and I laid there for a while, and I kind of was like, you know, I really want the dog to sleep on the foot of the bed. Like, I had been so used to sleeping next to my ex, and then before that in an apartment full of roommates, and then before that in an apartment with my family. So being on my own was really kind of sad, and I wanted that extra person or thing in the room to kind of keep me company. Yeah, it sucks being alone when you're in a shitty bad place. Like, I think that when you're in a good place where you feel happy about where you are in your own life, or you're happy with who you are, being alone is nice, but I wasn't in a place where I was feeling good about being alone. So I went into the living room and I scooped up the dog and I put him on the foot of the bed, and it was really funny. He laid there for about 30 seconds, and then he very tentatively got up and he walked over to the front of the bed where I had my head on the pillow, and he put his head right here on my neck because I kind of sleep on my side. And we'd literally known each other for about 10 hours, and the fact that this dog, who did not know me at all, was so trusting of me, it was like the connection was like instant between us. It was unbelievable. I mean, like, if I could say anything about my relationship with Murphy, it was that we had that like movie dog owner friendship. Like, I don't know if I'll ever have that again in my life. Like, it was the most amazing bond. And it was so funny because when he died a few weeks ago, my best friend Dana actually wrote to me, and she said that, I'm sorry, she said that you never get the dog that you want, you always get the dog that you need. And that was it. I mean, we were two completely different species. And we were both like in the same exact place at the same exact time. Like, we both needed each other. And so I don't think I had ever been in such a dark place. I mean, my parents had divorced and that had been really hard, but to lose the person that you're in love with, especially to like all of the things that I had lost it to, it was very, very difficult. And so all of a sudden I have this wonderful little dog who just wants my love, and I want his love, and it was perfect. I think I lived in Whitestone for about 6 months, and then I moved in with my dad and my brother, which was probably one of the best things that I did. I lived with them for 2 years, and it was awesome in the sense that I reconnected with my family, but I also moved back into Manhattan, and I was closer to social life, I was closer to friends again, and my life immediately went right back onto track. I started going out, I had lots of friends, I was out all the time, and I also had this wonderful doggy to boot. And I have tons of amazing stories. He was kind of like the mascot of all of my friends. Such a nice guy. He was always on everybody's lap. He had a lot of separation anxiety, so he wasn't completely and totally housebroken, but I never punished him. I think that a lot of people thought that was sort of strange. But having come out of the situation that I'd come out of, to me, Murphy could do no wrong. And it was around that time that we tried to start and crate train him. The vet had said if we put him in the crate when we're not in the apartment, he wouldn't mess in the crate. But he would anyway. He would urinate in the crate and actually sit in his urine, and then I'd come home and I'd have a bigger mess to clean. I'd clean the floor and the crate and the dog and everything. It was just crazy. So he was very smart, very stubborn. He kind of knew what he wanted and what he didn't want. My brother used to say that he'd put a newspaper on top of Murphy when Murphy was lying on the couch, and he'd leave for like 2 or 3 hours and come back and the newspaper was still on top of Murphy. He was awesome. And besides having that one specific problem, he had clearly been abused. I'd take him off of his leash and he would literally follow me around like the way a small child would. So he was definitely the clingiest dog that I'd ever had, but it was, as I said, perfect for me. I needed someone to be clingy to me, because I had been clingy to somebody else who, for all intents and purposes, didn't want me. So yeah, I'd go to the dog park and I'd take him off his leash, and from time to time he would look up and he'd be like, "Oh my God, where's Mom?" And I'd have to say, "I'm here, Murph, I'm here." And then he would go back to sniffing and playing and whatever. I remember one time, and he was such a gentleman too, like he was such a gentleman. He'd sit for kids on the street, he'd let everybody pet him and hug him. And anyway, my dad lives in this building, there's like 30 floors. It's huge. I mean, you walk in and there's elevators on one side, elevators on the other side. It's enormous. And we were going for a walk one day. I didn't have him on his leash. I was getting onto the elevator on the 3rd floor, which is where we lived. And I stepped off the elevator in the lobby and couldn't find him because he hadn't come off the elevator. So then I was like frantically running up the steps and everything, and I was stopping at every single elevator stop. And I went all the way to the top of the building, came all the way back down. And where was Murphy? He was in the lobby near the benches, sitting with some of the old ladies and their nurses being patted. He was so funny. He did stupid, crazy things like that all of the time. With my dad for 2 years, and those 2 years were phenomenal. They were amazing, wonderful. But at the end of 2 years, I needed my independence again. I needed to be on my own. And I moved in with my best friend Dana, who lived at the time in Brooklyn. She actually now lives in Minnesota with her husband. And that has been and will always be very hard for me, because this is my childhood best friend, my sister, soulmate, everything, and she's so far away, it kind of sucks. But I'm glad that we got to have the time that we did while we were living together. And she had a cat, so it was Murphy's first time living with a cat, and again, no problems. He was such a gentle soul. I mean, he never went after squirrels or birds or mice or any other dogs. He never went after Dana's cat at all. He was just such a gentleman. He was like this southern guy with like these wonderful manners. But anyway, living in Brooklyn with Dana, I lived with her for a couple of months, and then I met my husband Garrett. And Garrett actually would come over. He tells a really funny story. We lived kind of on the cusp of a not so good part of Brooklyn and then Park Slope. And so when we would come out of the building, we'd go towards the not so good part to get Chinese food from the store that was around the corner from us all the time. And he tells the story of we had only been dating for a few weeks, and basically dating meant he would come over, we'd watch a movie and make out for a while. And we had the Chinese food out, and I was eating it, and Murphy was kind of picking at the vegetables on the side of my plate, and I was letting him. And Garrett looked absolutely disgusted with me at the time, and he was like, ew. And I think I said something along the lines of, what? We have the same germs. Like, what? And he tells that story all the time. And I don't quite remember it that way, but I believe him. I mean, Murph was like, he was my furry child. And, yeah. But, unfortunately for Garrett, he moved back in with his parents for a while too. And I think within 3 weeks of moving back in with his parents, there was a fire in their apartment, and the whole family was displaced, and Garrett actually came and lived with me and Dana. And so we were in Brooklyn together, the three of us, for I'd say 6 months or so. And then Garrett and I went through, Garrett actually proposed to me while we were living in Brooklyn, and we thought that we would have time to plan a wedding and, you know, kind of get married and whatever else. And it didn't work out that way. I ended up getting pregnant way before schedule, and we decided that we're just going to go to City Hall and get married, and that's what we did. And about a month after we got married, I lost the pregnancy. So then I was going through grief again. And who was there for me again but Murphy? And this is a dog that was completely and totally in tune with everything that I was feeling. I mean, for the entirety of our life together, he would literally let me like kind of collapse on top of him. And he'd sit there and he'd put up with it, and he was just an amazing kind of companion. He was more like a person than a dog, really. He was more like a person. But after that, we ended up, my husband and I, getting a place on the Upper East Side. So we moved out of Brooklyn, and Murphy's been, or he lived in a lot of places here in New York. But we moved out of Brooklyn and we moved to the Upper East Side, and it was this little studio apartment. And yeah, we just lived there for about a year, and then I was pregnant again with Finn. And we used to say, I think that's kind of around the time that Murphy had some of his weight issues. We like to say that Murphy gained all the sympathy weight during my pregnancy. Because I had a very hard pregnancy. I was sick the entire time from start to finish. I'd read about all these wonderful cravings that women get, and I didn't have a craving for anything. I just had aversions to everything. And it was very easy to quit smoking at that time because I was literally barfing every single day. And I mean, just the smell of cigarette smoke would send me over the edge. But I would try and walk Murphy as much as I could, and I was very, very attached to him. I guess that, like, maybe that maternal thing that starts to happen to women as they get bigger and bigger and bigger and they start to feel the baby move. So Murphy, he would kind of sit on the couch next to me, and we would eat ice cream together, literally off the same spoon. And I have these wonderful memories of him resting his head on my enormous belly, and and the baby would kick, and it would hit him like here or here, and he would just kind of sit up, and his ears would go up, and he'd look down at my belly for a moment, and then he'd just put his head back down, like, you know, it was pretty awesome. And when we eventually brought the baby home, I remember she made like a cry that sounded probably like a squeaky toy, and he dashed over to her and kind of jumped up on the bed, and for a moment we thought he was gonna like jump on her, but he didn't. He just sort of looked at her and sniffed her, and there was no like having to teach him that this is a baby and don't go near it. And he was very, very, like, I guess it smelled like me. And I think he just knew, like, he was amazing. He just kind of knew. 3 or 4 months after having Finn, I stopped nursing because I had to go back to work for about a month, and I went into severe postpartum depression, where I, like, just didn't want to be a parent. I didn't want to be near the baby. I was angry and paranoid, and I had gone through depression breaking up with my ex, but it had seemed like the worst thing that was ever happening or had ever happened to me, but I think that going through postpartum was actually the worst thing that ever happened to me. And I didn't feel supported by anybody in my life. I was angry at everybody. And Murphy was there through the whole thing. In fact, he was probably the only being in my life that I felt completely comfortable with. Everybody else seemed to have some sort of agenda. Of course, I was thinking this in my warped, crazy mind. And I did go to therapy, and I got the help that I needed. And it's one of those subjects that a lot of people don't really talk about, but it happens more frequently than you know. But yeah, it took me, I think around the time Finn turned 1, I was pretty much recovered. But it had taken a long, long time, and I didn't really go back to feeling like myself until she was almost 2. And yeah, Murph was he was there through that too. He was constantly by my side, and you know, he was definitely a dog that experienced several different moves. He went through each and every one of my life changes and decisions with ease and a wagging tail, and he was the thing that kind of kept me going. 5 months after the baby was born, I was in the middle of going through postpartum. We actually moved again, and we moved to the Upper West Side, and I think that time was the best time of Murphy's life. We lived on 79th Street and Riverside Drive, so we were on the west side by the highway, by the park, and I would literally come out my front door and there'd be this wonderful big open space for Murphy to kind of play. And it was a dog party, seriously, every single day. Before and after 9, the dogs were allowed to be off their leashes in the park. And it was a great time for Murph, just because he was constantly free and loose, and he was constantly meeting other dogs, and I was meeting other dog owners, and actually that in and of itself also helped a lot with my postpartum depression. And as I was coming out of it, I started to bring Finn along with me, and that also helped too, trying to incorporate my baby into a life or a hobby that I really enjoyed, and that was definitely part of it, having a dog. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about that, kind of. I mean, Murph, you know, then my friend Robbie came from Mexico, and he stayed with us for a while because he didn't really have any place to go, and he didn't really have any friends at the time, and Murphy sort of accepted Robbie as like another kind of roommate, and you know, he was just an awesome dog. And then last June, yeah, I think it was last June, we moved here again. We moved to the Upper East Side again. So like this was the last apartment, this apartment that I'm in now, this was the last apartment that Murphy lived in. And we're very close to Central Park, but we actually didn't really go to Central Park all that much, because in the time from the West Side to here, the Upper East Side again, Murphy aged a lot. And he definitely struggled with weight, or we struggled with him with weight. He had that beagle nose, and so he'd find trash everywhere and he'd eat it, and he would sneak things off the coffee table, and then as Finn started to kind of walk and toddle around the apartment, you know, she'd drop things constantly, and Garrett and I would feed him also, I mean, like scraps. And yeah, I think that maybe we were a little irresponsible. I suppose I feel some guilt, because he would fluctuate in weight. There was definitely times in his life where he was way too heavy. But he loved food, and he always got food, and I feel like he always got love from us, and he was walked many times a day, because I did go back to work for a while, but then I decided that I needed to stay home as part of raising Fanula and also recovering from having had postpartum. I needed to have the experience of being a parent, and if I needed to make mistakes, I needed to make mistakes. It was just part of my life journey. I needed to figure things out for myself. So in the last couple of years that we were together, Murphy also had me all of the time, which I am very happy to say. Like, I wasn't working, I wasn't leaving him, I wasn't gone for weeks on end or days or hours on end. You know, I was always home. And my daughter, I remember she would walk him, and I would say to Murph, don't pull, and he was so awesome. He would kind of just trot besides the baby. He was so like in tune with everything that was going on in his life around him, and he was so in tune with me. Like, he listened to me. It was weird. We like communicated without words, and yeah, it was just pretty amazing. Murphy actually started to get sick around the time of Sandy, Hurricane Sandy, which just happened. Everything went wrong all at once. I knew Halloween would be ruined, and I was already upset about that because Halloween's my favorite holiday. I don't think that any of us really realized how bad the hurricane would be, and I also had no idea that my dog would die like simultaneously while all of these things were happening. Basically what happened is Murphy poisoned himself. The one thing that he loved, food, ended up being the thing that killed him. And my friend Robbie actually stayed for 2 nights, because he lives in Queens and he was worried about his apartment, so he was sleeping on the couch. And my husband set out a plate of like 3 little Musketeer bars, because we had candy in preparation for Halloween, and little cupcakes, little vanilla cupcakes. There were 4 of them. And Garrett was out of the apartment. He was like all over our building at the time helping people because our lights were flickering. There was a fire that was under the street on Park Avenue, and I was getting crazy and antsy being stuck in the apartment, so I left the apartment too. I told Robbie I'm going to be gone for about 5 minutes, just like watch the baby, watch the dog, watch the cat, I'll be right back. And when I came back in 5 minutes later, Murphy had his feet up on the coffee table and he had licked the entire plate clean. And I yelled at him, he got down and everything. And the funny thing is that I wasn't really worried because he'd done really insane things like that before, and he'd gotten sick, and that would be the end of that. Like, you know, he'd vomit, he'd have diarrhea, and it would be over with. And he didn't get sick until the next day, and he started to vomit. And he also had diarrhea, but what was funny is that he couldn't control the vomit, but like he was such a good boy. At this point, I think when we moved to the Upper West Side, like Murphy's problems with being housebroken were over. He was so good. He never had an accident in the house, like for years. And even though his tummy was all upset and he probably needed to poo all the time, he waited until I would take him out. That's how awesome and such a good dog that he was. Yeah, so he ended up vomiting, and again, I was still not worried. I figured let it all come out, and I was feeding him Pepto-Bismol. I was giving him water. I was not feeding him any food or treats at all. I was taking him out for his walks, and he was having a really hard time. I didn't know what was going on inside of him. And then on Halloween night, I could tell, like, I was posting about it on Facebook. I was trying to ask friends, like, suggestions. I made some boiled rice for him. He didn't have any interest in eating it. I figured it was because he didn't like the way it tasted without chicken, and at the time I didn't have any boiled chicken, so I was just giving him the rice, and he didn't want it. And Halloween night, we had to kind of make a show of it for our daughter because she was looking forward to it. Obviously, the whole week of school was gone. They had canceled school all over New York, and all the parties had been canceled, the parade had been canceled, so I'm sure there were children everywhere that were disappointed. And we took Finn trick-or-treating in our building, and then we headed over to my in-laws who live in the neighborhood also, and we went to their building, and we went trick-or-treating, and we were going to go back into the apartment and spend some time with them, but my husband thankfully forgot that he had left his cell phone at home. And he was like, we gotta walk back and get it because I need to have it on me. And when we came into the apartment, Murphy had vomited on the couch. He hadn't been able to get up in time. He'd vomited in his dog bed on the rug again. And it was just bile. And it was around that time, and he was so weak from all the vomiting, so dehydrated that he was barely able to walk. I mean, I took him out for a walk, and he could only get around the corner, and then I had to kind of scoop him up and carry him back inside. I went in, and I started talking to my husband, and I was like, look, I have to take him to the ER. Like, this is far gone. And my husband started to argue with me a little bit because Murphy had done things like this before and gotten through them and been fine. And the ER here in New York, the animal hospital, is very, very expensive. I mean, like thousands of dollars expensive. So he's like, why don't you just go out and get some Pedialyte and let's see how that works. And so, of course, my husband laid with him on the couch and, we gave him Pedialyte, and he held it down for a good hour or two, and then it came back up, and I think around 11 o'clock, my husband was like, no, you really should take him to the ER. So I had to wash all the face paint that I had from Halloween off my face. I changed out of the costume that I had, and I rushed him in a taxi. Being in the dog ER was kind of like being in a human ER. You sort of sit in the waiting room and you just kind of hang there until you get called. And Murphy did pretty well for a while. He was kind of laying at my feet, and he was clearly ill, but he wasn't making any sounds and he wasn't moving around. And then all of a sudden he just vomited everywhere, and it was really scary because it was kind of like he almost like emptied every ounce of liquid, I guess, in his body. And the nurses came, they rushed him right back. They hooked him up to IVs immediately, and of course I was really panicked. But I spoke to the doctor that was on call, and basically the doctor said, these things happen, and I'm so glad you brought the dog in, and we're going to look at him and take care of him. And I had a pretty good feeling about the whole thing. Anyway, as for the money part of it, they gave me an estimate for a 3-night stay, and it was going to be like $3,200. And the way it works is that you basically pay for more than half when you drop the dog off, and then you pay for the difference when you come to pick the dog up. And as upset as I wasn't quite like at the place where I was believing that Murph was dying. I just thought that he was really, really ill. So I paid $2,100 up front, which is, of course, a huge sum of money for my family. We are a one-income household, and we have a daughter that we have to take care of and ourselves, and bills and groceries and everything that a normal family would have to pay for. But Murphy is a family member, and I think I was on the phone around 4 a.m. calling my husband, and I was just like, this is how much it's going to cost. Is this okay with you? And he was kind of like, yeah, let's just do it because we don't want him to be sick. We don't want him to suffer. And I left him there. He was very, very upset. We'd only ever been separated a few times. If I went on vacation or something, most of the time it was a family member that was looking after Murphy, like my mom's twin sister, Ellen, or my mom, or my dad. Sometimes I think my in-laws might have watched him a couple of times too. So yeah, he wasn't a fan of being left behind by me. But I did it, and I think I got home around 6 a.m. And then the next morning around 10, I got a call from the doctor that was on call in the morning, and she said that he had eaten breakfast and done really well, but they had taken a sonogram of his insides, and apparently the problem was that he had pancreatitis. And this is something I hadn't actually heard of before, so I didn't really know very much about it. And according to them, his pancreas was the worst pancreas they'd ever seen on a sonogram, ever. It was super inflamed and, just totally, totally swollen. His pancreas was producing huge amounts of insulin, and he had acid and fat in his blood. He was having trouble urinating. One of his kidneys was weakening. And of course, hearing that on the phone from the doctor is like really upsetting. You're kind of like, oh my God, what do I do now? And the vet told me not to panic, that she'd seen cases that had been very, very slight and then the dog had died. And then she'd seen cases where the dog had had a terrible case like Murphy and made it through. So I think one of my fears was that as Murphy was going into old age was that he would be diabetic, and I kind of knew that that would be his way out. Sort of like when I think about my own death, I think I'll probably die from smoking. You kind of just know that that vice in your life that you enjoy so much will eventually kill you, and that's what it looked like. So we went to visit him in the evening, and it was really, really disconcerting to see him because he was totally weakened. His belly had swollen like 3 times the size, and it was all shaved, and his paw was shaved too where the IVs were. But he wagged his tail. He was super happy to see us, and he laid down at my feet, and he just went to sleep. The vet was like, most of the time the dogs are so stressed by being in the hospital that when their owners come, they just want to be with their owners and rest and sleep because they're finally with somebody that they totally know and trust. So Murphy wasn't very active when we came to visit him, and of course we had to leave him again, which was really difficult because then I saw how sick he was and I didn't want to leave him. But he stayed another night, and then the next morning I got a phone call again saying that this time there's been a setback. Murphy regurgitated his breakfast and had been regurgitating all morning long. And the vet seemed to think that he needed intensive care and would need to stay in the hospital for another few days. And so as I started to talk to her on the phone about it, I realized that we were talking about $5,000 or $6,000 here. And I honestly didn't think that my family could afford to pay for that. And I also wanted my dog back. So I came in to talk to her around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Murphy had been sick for a few days. Now he's been in the hospital for a few days, so we've been separated, we've been stressed, we've been dealing with the financial aspect of it, and we're completely and totally drained of energy. I was so tired, but I had to find out if my dog was okay, and the vet told me that I could take him home and she was going to give me all the meds that he needed and everything, but she said to me that she wasn't optimistic about him getting better at home because if he kept regurgitating, the meds and the antibiotics wouldn't get into his system where they needed to be. He really needed to have IVs. But when I looked at my dog, I could see that I think when I saw him the second day and I started talking to the vet, I started to think about the possibility of he's dying and I'm going to have to put him to sleep. And I think that I sort of maybe began to know that that was what was happening. I was determined to bring him home. Of course, with Sandy having happened, there was no gas, there was no taxis, there was nothing. So taking him home required walking home. We live on 75th Street and the vet was on 62nd, all the way by the East River. So he walked, and he would vomit every 15 minutes or so as he was walking home. Then I would scoop him up and carry him for a while, and then we would both sit down on a sidewalk and just rest for a while. And eventually I got him home. The coolest part was that my husband called his best friend Joe, and Joe and Emily, his girlfriend, who's my friend, they know how we feel about Murphy, and Joe lives out in Long Island, and Emily lives in Queens, so they're very far from Manhattan, but they figured out the train schedule somehow, the crazy out-of-whack Hurricane Sandy train schedule, and they came into the city with backpacks and pajamas and extra set of clothes, and they were staying the weekend with us to try and help us get through Murphy's illness. So when I came home, they were actually there. And it was great because having them there made everything a little bit more lighthearted. I'd done a lot of laundry in preparation for Murphy coming home, and he was filthy from the vet. He'd had diarrhea in his crate, he'd vomited. So Emily and I stuck him immediately in the bathtub, and we gave him a bath with some warm water and everything, which I think He wasn't always the biggest fan of having a bath, but like when you're feeling sick, it's a nice kind of feeling, and he let us do it, and you know, it was good to get him clean and to like kind of just soap him down and just make his fur shine again. And then we had him in the bed, in his dog bed in the living room, and he was covered with some blankies and towels, and we had the heating pad on him, which he really, really liked. And Garrett and Joe were kind of sitting over him. They were playing video games for a while, and Emily and I went out to get some Starbucks and to walk around and talk to each other for a while. And then we came back, and you know, we fed him his meds, and he kept some of them down, then he vomited some of them up, and it was literally like an around the clock kind of thing. He had 6 or 7 different medications that he was taking, and he was taking them in hourly increments, not all at once. So we really had everything on a timed schedule, and definitely 24-hour care. It was really intense. So yeah, came back in, we gave him more meds. I took him for a walk by myself, and he peed, and I then, you know, he was so swollen in his midsection I couldn't put his harness on, so I had like a little leash around his throat, which really bothered me, but it was more comfortable, I think, than the harness. And then, you know, he came in and he laid on the carpet for a very long time, and I laid with him. From time to time he would get up and he'd walk around the apartment and he'd look at our cat, and Fanula would hug him and we would kiss him, and you know, it was just kind of following Murphy around the apartment and, you know, spending time with him. And I was sated that night, but I was in denial. And the next morning was the real test. We had to feed him, and of course he'd been prescribed a very low sodium diet. So we had been boiling chicken in the crock pot, and we started to serve it to him, and Emily had actually crushed up his medicine for that morning and put it in the chicken, and he didn't show any interest in eating that, and we thought maybe it was because of the meds, because obviously the meds don't taste good. So we offered him boiled chicken without meds. He didn't like that either, and then we offered him his regular dog food, and he didn't seem interested in that either. So that's kind of when I knew in my heart that things were not going to go well for us that day. Packed everybody up, and we got into a taxi, and we went up to the ASPCA on 92nd Street. And as I said, I still had some hope that maybe the vets there would be able to do something for him. They had told me at the animal hospital, the first animal hospital, that ASPCA is less expensive. And yeah, we thought maybe they might be able to give us more information or just help us. So we brought him in and everything, and I'm so glad that Emily and Joe were there. It was like the best thing that could have happened, and what they did for us was extraordinarily kind. I mean, they really were so conscious and aware of the fact that my husband and I needed privacy, that we needed somebody to look after Finn and take her out of the situation when it started to get like too sad. And yeah, Fanula didn't really know what was going on. She knew Murphy was really, really ill. I was trying to explain it to her. And when we got there, we waited for some time, and then we finally were seen by a vet. And I actually don't remember the vet's name. She was a young woman, so in tune with everything that we were feeling. Not to say that the other vets that I had been dealing with were not, but for some reason, this vet really, really was she kind of understood everything right away. And I said to her, I was like, if there is an 80-20 chance that Murphy could get through this, I will consider putting out more money for him to stay the weekend or stay the next couple of days and everything. And she said to me, well, to tell you the truth, it's really more of a 50-50 chance. And I can't give you any guarantee at all. I mean, we can keep him here for the weekend, hook him up to some more IVs and everything. And I thought about it for a while, and like Murphy and I had been separated for a few days, and he'd been in the hospital, and it'd been very traumatic for him. And when he had been home the night before, it was the first time he'd been relaxed since the whole entire incident. So I thought about him getting sick and dying in a hospital, in a cage, away from me, and You know, I felt like that would be the biggest letdown that I could ever do for, like, I wouldn't be doing the right thing by him. And I kept looking at my friends and my husband to kind of tell me what to do, because in truth Murphy was my dog, and like I had to be the one to say what had to happen. So I thought about it and I decided that no, it's time for Murphy to move on. And it's probably one of the hardest decisions that I've ever made. I'm sure that there are parents in New York City right now taking their kids off life support. And, you know, I've tried to put my feelings about this all into perspective. There are worse situations that families go through, but I think that everybody's drama, everybody's heartbreak is kind of big to them. And, you know, I don't want to belittle the courage that it took to say, okay, like, I can't put you through this anymore because it's selfish of me. And Murph he had to leave the room he basically had to leave the room to get the little IV put back into his paw. And at that point he was frightened, because he could tell that I was very upset. He didn't want to leave me. And I had to walk down the hall with the vet, and she had been so awesome. She hadn't kind of swayed us one way or another. She was just like, these are your two options. And as we were walking down the hall, I was crying and I was upset, and I said, you know, I feel so guilty. Am I doing the right thing? And she kind of, I guess because I'd already made the decision, she turned to me and she said, yeah, you are. You're doing the right thing. This dog is very sick and he's suffering, and this is the right thing for him. So I felt like it was kind of a gift in a way to have the doctor say that to me and take some of the burden of the feeling off of me. But yeah, when Murphy came back into the room, he was wagging his tail. There was definitely still life in him. You know, he's still my dog. He was so in tune. He knew that something was screwed up, and he just didn't really understand what was going on, but he was still shaking his tail, still being the wonderful, adorable dog that I had had for an entire decade, who literally saved my life and rescued me countless times through tons and tons of depression and sadness, and he was just amazing. So Fanula said goodbye to him, and Emily and Joe took her out of the room, which was great. And we had an option to kind of leave the room and not witness. But I felt like I needed to be there because I needed it for closure for myself, and I also needed to be there for Murphy so that he wouldn't be frightened, because he'd already spent the last few days of his life with so many doctors that he didn't know. I assumed that he was really scared. But in the last couple moments, he didn't seem scared. There was a little towel on the floor, and he was too nervous about lying down, so he was sitting up kind of. And we were very close. He had his face kind of on my shoulder, and I had my hands on him like this. And I told him what was going on. I told him that, you know, he was going to sleep, and this is how it's going to be, and you're not going to feel any pain. You're going to go to a better place, and you're not going to be hurting anymore. And, you know, I think Garrett said a few things to him too, but I don't really remember because I was just so upset, and like, I kind of feel a little sad about it. Like, I couldn't keep myself in more control. I wish I had had more control over myself and not been so like hysterical. And the first shot was just kind of like anesthesia to sort of put him to sleep, like, but not actually, it wasn't the shot that stopped the heart. It's kind of to numb the pain. And like, I mean, I guess if you were getting your wisdom teeth out, they gave me anesthesia that knocked me out and stuff. But he kind of flopped over a little bit onto the ground, and we just kept loving on him. And the second shot was the shot that was meant to stop his heart, and it took a while because his heart was so big and strong, and as I like to say, full of love for us, that, you know, the doctor actually left the room for a moment. She said, I'm gonna get a second dose because I don't want him, you know, dangling here, and I want to make sure that he passes smoothly. And when she left the room, we noticed that his muscles, the energy in his muscles, were twitching a little, which we weren't prepared for, and kind of frightened us a little bit. Yeah. But, yeah, we were definitely not prepared for that. The most amazing thing, though, that happened was, and it's kind of hard to explain. I don't know if you believe in God or what your religion is, or if you believe in spirits or afterlife or anything like that, but I definitely do. And we literally watched his spirit leave. It was crazy. I mean, like, perhaps you don't actually excuse me, you don't actually see the spirit leave, but you certainly feel it. It's tangible, it's there, it's all around you. And I mean, we watched his breathing stop, we watched his heart stop, and I mean, he was like his energy was all around us. And I spoke to my husband about it later, and he said that he had the same feeling, and it was kind of like awe-inspiring and just amazing. And yeah, and then he was gone, and basically the mourning part of it all began. The days that followed, a few things happened for me. I had all of my really good girlfriends reach out to me, and I got to, well, I mean, Emily and Joe stayed the entire weekend. They even stayed the night that Murphy died, and I think they went home the next day. And then a couple days later, I saw my girlfriend Sabrina. I spoke to my friend Robbie on the phone. I talked to both of my parents. I talked to a couple other friends here and there, and then, you know, I posted about it on Facebook, and I got such a positive sort of response from everybody that I know. As it turns out, there's not a single one of you that hasn't had an experience similar to mine. And it was just kind of the first time that I was dealing with the loss of a pet. And here I am, 30 years old, and I'm totally traumatized by what I've just experienced, and thinking to myself, how am I ever going to go on now that he's gone? And I couldn't even think about the idea of another dog. It just was like too foreign and too strange. I didn't know. For a moment there, I didn't even think I wanted another dog. The ASPCA is affiliated with the crematorium/pet cemetery in Riverdale. So I had Murphy individually cremated. I picked out a really beautiful urn for him, and I had the option of actually going to the place and witnessing the cremation, but I decided not to do that. I dealt with two very lovely women on the phone. I guess they kind of run the show up there. I mean, maybe they don't actually carry out the cremations, but they carry out everything else. So they come to the ASPCA and they pick up the dog's remains, and then they have like a number. There's like so much paperwork and like numbers so that like remains don't get confused with other people's dogs' remains and everything, because that was my big worry, was that I want Murphy. I don't want anybody else. I don't want Murphy to get lost with anybody. And they handled it really well. They reassured me, and yeah, so that part of it was taken care of. Once I gave them all my credit card information, I just felt so much better. I felt like, you know, I've done everything that I can, and it's all out of my hands now. It's up to them. And yeah, there was, and along with all the grief that I was feeling, because I mean, he died on November 3rd, and we're almost in December, and like every single day has been different for me, kind of. In the first few days, it was like tears on and off all day, like just uncontrollable. And also, it was weird because I was also relieved that he'd passed, just because he'd been in so much pain, and I had been so stressed and so worried for him, that when he was actually gone and he was at peace, I was feeling so relieved. Which made me feel guilty too. And then of course, you know, he's all over the house. He's like all over our house. Like he used to shed a lot, and I would sweep the floor every single day, and when I came in, you know, his fur is on the floor, and his blankies are in their places, and even his throw up is on the towel that, you know, he used right before we took him up to the ASPCA. So all of that stuff had to be dealt with. And yeah, that was hard too. A couple days after he died, my husband decided to look online about rescue organizations here on the Upper East Side. He was just curious. We had started to talk about another dog, but we decided maybe for my birthday in February, and then we were talking about like, okay, maybe after the summer. And I just didn't really know what I wanted to do, and yeah. And anyway, I was taking a shower and my husband barges in on me and he's like, oh my God, Siobhan, I have to show you this. He's like, I was kind of afraid to show you, but you know, you have to see it. And anyway, he typed in rescue organizations on his iPad, and the first ad that he clicked on, without searching it, without specifically looking for it, was Maggie the lemon beagle. And I don't know if you guys know, but lemon beagles are a little bit unusual here up north. Down south, where people hunt or have more land for the dogs to run around on, a hunting dog like that is a little bit more common. So she was coming from somewhere down south, just as Murphy had, and it is unusual to see a lemon beagle in New York City. You see beagles, but not lemon beagles. And her ad read that she was good with kids and good with cats, and she didn't bray like a lot of beagles. Murphy was a very quiet dude. He was very, very mellow. It said she was a year old and everything, and she was being fostered by Posh Pets Rescue. So I took a few days and I thought about it, and I felt kind of like I wasn't sure what to do, sort of like, you know, would it be disrespectful to Murph to contact the woman that's responsible for fostering this dog? Like, should I get another dog when my, like, love of my life dog has just recently died? I don't know. And I had family members telling me that I should wait, but I spoke to my husband and he said, you know what, you really should just do whatever it is that you want to do. And, yeah, it's okay with me. So I contacted Linda and we began emailing, and over the course of 2 days I think she got to know me. She said later when we actually met that I sounded really intense. And that's probably true. I probably did sound really intense, but that's because I loved Murphy so intensely, and suddenly I had it in my head that like Maggie was going to help me through this. And I needed her badly, and I needed her now. Yeah, so I probably did sound like a nut job. But Maggie was being fostered by a girl in Williamsburg. We went out to meet her. The girl that was watching her thought we were a decent family, and she contacted Linda, and she was like, yeah, I don't want anybody else visiting Maggie. I think this is the family. So then we went back into Manhattan, to the Upper East Side. And we interviewed with Linda, which was like, I mean, it was like having an interview for adopting a child. It was very thorough and intense. But we paid the fee, and the next day I went and picked up Maggie, and she was my dog and has been ever since. Yeah. So within, I'd say, a week and a few days of Murphy's death, I had another doggie in my life. And I know that that's crazy, but I just don't know how to live without a dog. I've always preferred dogs to people. I know that sounds terrible. Well, I mean, I care about people too, but I guess I love dogs so much. I just hate what people do to dogs, and they are so special and so important, and I feel like they will love you through anything and everything. So abusing them, it's like abusing a child to me. I don't know. But, yeah. Maggie's amazing. We took her up to Petco on 86th Street, and we got her all sorts of toys and a jacket and a new harness and collar and a leash. She's been fantastic. She's learning how to go to the bathroom outside the house. She's having some accidents. She's stubborn like Murphy. But she walks every day in the morning with me and Finn to school, and like she picks Finn up with me after school. She's just a great dog. And the crazy thing is that the day that I picked her up, it was a Sunday. I believe it was a Saturday. And when I came home with her, and actually I should mention this, Anush, the girl that had helped me adopt Murphy, picked me up from Williamsburg with Maggie. She had been with me 10 years before with Murphy, and then she was with me again for Maggie. So it was really cool. It was like little cycle. But yeah, when we got back to the house, Murphy's ashes had been delivered via the mail. So both dogs came home to me on the same day, which was amazing. We really feel like Murphy kind of pointed Garrett in the direction of Maggie. It was just too big of a coincidence. It was just too strange. And the fact that he came back the same day that she arrived. And then when we opened the package, of course, there was his little urn and his ashes and everything. But there was also a condolence letter. And as it turns out, the woman that I had been working with during his cremation, her name was Margaret. And my new dog's name is Margaret, except we call her Maggie. So it was like, whoa, kind of, wow, this is really meant to be, this is fate, and like, it's amazing. Yeah, let me go get Maggie, actually. This is Maggie Waggles, and she's such a good girl. Oops. I don't know if you can see her. She doesn't really like being picked up. It's very different from Murphy. She's a lot skinnier than Murph. Yes, I love you too. And yeah, she doesn't like to cuddle the same way that Murphy used to like to cuddle, so that's been hard to get used to a little bit. You know, like, I just want to do this all the time, and she's not really into it unless she wants to be. She licks a lot. She gives a lot of kisses, which is, Murphy did that too, but this dog doesn't stop. And she has been sort of very interested in our goldfish and our hamster in a way that Murphy wasn't. And of course she's female, so it's totally like the same breed of dog, but like completely in different personality. She's also, as I said, she's a girl, so she's really dainty, and she seems more clean than Murph. But yeah, she's a really good girl. And she's a beautiful girl. If Murphy taught me anything in the last 10 years, or even in the last few days of his life, it was definitely about what it means to put an animal that you love to sleep, or just in general putting an animal to sleep. We hear about it all the time, but I never really understood the finality of it until I actually saw it happen. And it makes me really sad when I think about any kind of animal that is in a shelter, a dog or a cat, like, you know, little baby animal, and they're put to sleep because nobody wants them, and their life energy kind of just leaves them. And it just, I don't know, it's kind of awoken something in me that I didn't really have before. I've thought a lot about volunteering in local shelters here in New York. I'm not really sure how I'd be able to emotionally handle that because, as I said, I have quite a love for dogs, and I think it would be an amazing thing to do, but would also kill me at the same time. Other than that, what can I say about Murph? I have so many stories about him. Like, I really should write them all down. He was always on my lap, always at my feet, always giving me kisses, always begging for treats, always letting me cry on his furry shoulder, you know, playing in the park. He gave me an excuse to go out and meet people and have time alone for my thoughts, and the truth is that I was never really alone because he was always there with me, and he never left my side, ever. No matter how I looked, no matter what was going on in my life, no matter how crazy I became, he was my friend. And I do kind of still feel like, what am I doing? Where is he? You know, I look for him every day, and I've called Maggie Murphy a few times, which has made me feel guilty and sad and stuff. I'm in deep like with Maggie, but we're not quite in love yet. And the truth is that I'm not really sure I'm ever going to have the same kind of love with another animal that I did with Murphy. I'm going to try really hard with Mags because I am so fond of her, but that mutual understanding with no words, she's just a baby, so she doesn't have that yet, but Murphy and I, we could communicate, and we did all the time, without speaking. So I know it must seem a little weird to some of you who maybe have, as I said, never loved an animal or don't like animals or don't have pets. But when you put an emotional attachment onto anything, especially something that loves you back unconditionally and then you lose it, it's really hard. But yeah, I wanted to talk about him. I wanted to tell you why I've been gone for so long. This is the reason why, because it just seemed ridiculous to me to be doing anything hair related when Murphy had passed away. But I think that he would probably want me to go on with my life, probably. So yeah, I think I'm probably, after this video, going to start doing hair videos again. I have not practiced in weeks. I haven't made a braid in weeks, so I'm not sure what my next video will be, but yeah. I just wanted to talk about Murph and say hi to everybody too. And yes, I got a lot of messages from you guys about Hurricane Sandy and if I was okay, if my family's okay. Yes, we are. Thank you so much. And that's it for now. So sorry for the length of this video. See you next time. Bye.